Am I good? Okay. Hi, everybody. I know a couple people are still getting settled, but we're about to get started. So if everybody can take their seats, we're going to kick off in just a couple seconds here. Do we have a mic? Okay, fantastic. Thank you all so much for coming. Good evening, everybody. Thank you all for being with us tonight. My name is Kelly Singh. I have the honor of being the Acting Executive Director of More Homes Mississauga. Welcome to the official Mayoral Housing Debate. Tonight's event features our two leading candidates for Mayor of Mississauga based on the two most recent polls conducted by Liaison Strategies. We are so privileged to have them with us this evening. We have so many people to thank for helping us put together this event, including our sponsor, the Neptis Foundation, without whom tonight simply would not be possible. Thank you to UTM for being incredible partners. Thank you to UTM, the UTM Urbanism Club, for their support, and the student governor on the UTM Campus Council, Jan Dirkowitz, who has been incredibly helpful as far as putting together tonight's event and is also going to be running our time clock this evening. And most of all, thank you to all of you for spending your evening with us. I know that I speak for all of our members when I tell you how gratifying it is that you're all here. You know, More Homes Mississauga, we're an advocacy group, and our mission is in our name. We believe that Mississauga can overcome this housing crisis. What we need is a leader who understands the generational impact of today's housing policies and is prepared to build for everyone. More Homes Mississauga is a reflection of the city that we love. We are seniors, we are students, we are parents, we're retirees, we're renters, we're homeowners, and some of us sadly don't live here anymore because it's become too expensive for us to remain in a city that we've grown up in. And by being here tonight, you are all advocates. Just by showing up, you are sending the loudest possible message to the next mayor of Mississauga, who is very likely in the room with us tonight, that on June 10th, voters like you will be making your decision with housing in mind. On behalf of More Homes Mississauga, thank you so much for helping us amplify our message. Now, we are about to get this show on the road, but before I bring up our lovely moderator, I just want to share a few quick ground rules because we will actually need your help in order to have a successful debate this evening. Number one, please silence all of your cell phones. You are allowed to record or take a photo if you like. However, please turn off the flash. We don't want to blind our candidates midway through the discussion this evening. Number two, heckling and disruptions of any kind will not be tolerated. You will be asked to leave immediately, and our security will also approach you to leave if that were to happen. Number three, you're going to hear lots of things that you're going to love tonight, but if we stop to clap after each time the candidates speak, we're going to be here all night. So to help us just move things along, our moderator is going to indicate when it is appropriate to clap. Please listen to her. This is just so that we don't keep you here past midnight. And number four, if you need to leave the room at any time, please follow the directions of our ushers. You know, along the back here, we've got a lot of cameras, we've got a lot of wires, we've got a lot of microphones, and we don't want any trip and falls on the way out. And at all times, please follow the instructions of our moderator. Once she has the mic, she's not only in charge of our candidates, she's in charge of all of us in the audience. And please, again, adhere to what our volunteers are guiding us through. They've been incredibly helpful in putting this together. Now, having said all of that, I'm just about to introduce our moderator, and I will at last address the elephant in the room, or not in the room, I guess I should say. We were expecting three of the leading candidates this evening. Maybe about an hour and a half before we got set up tonight, we heard from her that she is no longer going to be attending debates for the rest of the by-election cycle. This is disappointing. This is not what we expected, but we believe that this conversation is important. We believe that you deserve to know where the candidates stand as far as how they are going to address this housing crisis. It has a generational impact, what the next mayor is going to decide when it comes to housing. And so we are very grateful to both of our candidates who have joined us here tonight and are willing to proceed with the conversation. The questions that are going to be asked are more or less the questions that we intended to ask regardless, just adjusted ever so slightly because our format has changed. This is going to be a little bit more of a Q&A, but they will have the opportunity to respond just as they would have had our third candidate been here. So having said that, we're going to press on. We're very excited to have you all here tonight, and I'm excited to bring up our moderator. She needs no introduction. You will recognize her face from virtually every television set across the Southern GTA. She is the host of not one, but two of CP24's flagship shows, and this is not her first time moderating a mayoral debate. Just a few months ago, she moderated the CP24 Toronto Mayoral Debate, so to our candidates, this is not her first rodeo. And best of all, she is a Mississauga resident. Please welcome Lena Latifa.
Thank you, Kelly. All right, good evening, everybody. Can everybody hear me all right? All right, thank you, Kelly, for that warm introduction. And thank you all for being here. I think it's really important that we take part in this discussion. Welcome to our Q&A event featuring two of the leading candidates for Mississauga's next mayor. It is a pleasure to be your moderator for tonight's discussion. This is how things are going to work. We are going to have 3 rounds featuring 3 questions each. At the end of each round, there will be a lightning round, candidates, where you will be able to state your positions on a single question in a short response. We will also have what we are calling a record round, focused on housing positions that each candidate has taken in their time as city councillor. Participating in tonight's discussion are Dipika Damerla, and Alvin Tedjo. Mr. Tedjo, Ms. Damerla, thanks so much for being here and welcome. At this time, I'd like to invite our 2 candidates to begin with their opening remarks. You each have 2 minutes, and you may, audience, applaud after each speaker. Ms. Damerla, you get to begin.
I'm Dipika Damerla, and I'm running to be the next mayor of Mississauga, and I want to thank More Homes Mississauga for organizing this debate, and I want to thank all of you for coming here today. You know, I think we can all agree that housing is a very important issue right now, not just in Mississauga, but in Ontario and in our country, and frankly, in many countries in this world. And for me, it's personal. A very close family, relative, for the past 4 years, I've seen this young couple put in offer after offer after offer and not be able to purchase the house because every single time they couldn't afford the asking price. In these 4 years, the young couple managed to get married. They just recently, last month, had a baby girl, but they haven't managed to buy a home, and they still live with their parents. We have to solve this problem for them, for many of you in this room, regardless of your age. We need to do 3 things. They're hard to do, but we know what we need to do. We need to build more homes. We need to build them faster, and we need to build them cheaper. But there's one more thing I am going to be laser focused on. It's not enough to just build more homes. We need to build neighborhoods, and we need to manage the growth. The growth, if it's not managed properly, will make our city unlivable. But if managed well, it will unlock so much opportunity. It's a golden opportunity, this growth, for Mississauga to become the city it should be, it can be. A city that unlocks its full economic potential, a city that unlocks its full cultural potential. You know, I like to say, well, I've got only 4 seconds left, so I'll share the story later on. But I just want to say I will bring a pragmatic and practical approach to managing this growth. I have the experience. I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Damerla. And audience, it's okay that you just clap for Ms. Damerla. A reminder, I will tell you when it is okay to applaud. Over to you, Mr. Tedjo.
Thank you, Lena. Everyone can hear me okay, right? Lena, when I hear you talk, I feel like there's a TV on somewhere because I'm so used to hearing your voice in the background. And I really want to thank everyone for coming here today, but especially More Homes Mississauga, Kelly and the team. You guys have done such an amazing job advocating for housing in this city, talking about and representing, young people who need more housing, seniors who are looking to downsize, newcomers who are growing their families. And there's such an incredible energy in this room to talk about housing tonight. I also want to thank the sound guys because I had this fear just 5 minutes ago before we started because I went to the bathroom and I was like, I really hope this microphone is off. And that, so hopefully whatever audio you have of me going to the bathroom is going to be deleted somewhere. But we truly are in an unprecedented crisis here in the city of Mississauga. There are so many people who can't afford to live in this city. And that affects us in so many different ways. That means we don't have affordable housing for the workers that we have in this city, the nurses, the teachers, everybody who makes up our society. We don't have the employees to support them. We don't have enough affordable housing for people who are growing up in this community. My parents moved here in the 1970s, and I had an opportunity to do what they did, which is grow up in the community to live in the community that I grew up in. And I have 3 young kids, and I want them to be able to do the same thing that I did. And right now, that's not possible. I think it is incredibly discouraging that some of our other candidates aren't here today. And while we want to stay positive and talk about housing, I think it's actually incredibly disrespectful as potentially the front-runner candidate to not respect you enough as voters to show up tonight to talk about what I think is the most important issue facing our city, which is housing. But that also means that she's not showing up to talk about the food bank and the shelters and the business community and everyone else and all the incredibly important issues that we have facing our city today. We need a leader for this city. We need a leader for this city who's not afraid to talk about difficult issues, who's not afraid of the questions, who's not afraid of the media, who's willing to stand up for what they believe in and tell people that. And I'm sure there's been concerning comments in the past, and this is a history that continues along that path. But what I want to talk about today is how we can build a better future for the city of Mississauga, and I believe I have the most comprehensive plan for us to get there. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Tedjo. And audience, you can clap for Mr. Tedjo if you want. You certainly don't have to. We will now begin our first round, and this round's theme is meeting our targets. Before we begin, I'd like to ask the audience, as I mentioned, to hold all the applause for the end of the round. Once I read the question, we will begin with Ms. Damerla. And the question is, Mississauga only managed to hit 39% of its provincial housing target in 2023. It is now May, and Mississauga has only reached 15% of its housing target for 2024. As mayor, how do you plan to meet Mississauga's housing target of 120,000 new homes by 2031? Ms. Damerla, you have 1 minute on the clock.
Thank you. I want to begin by kind of setting the storyline. And that is, the idea that Mississauga is not building isn't entirely true. It is true we've missed the targets, but here are some interesting facts. We have 32 construction cranes in Mississauga, among the highest in North America. We have 12,000 new residential units under construction. The challenge Mississauga has is that we're building mostly high-rises. So what you're going to find is there's going to be years where we are going to just blow our targets because 10,000 units, 3 buildings got built together. And there's going to be lean years. That doesn't mean we can't do better. We need to do better, and part of what we need to do better is we need to do our approvals faster. Absolutely. Mississauga needs to be able to approve housing faster, and I'll be happy to talk in more detail about what I plan to do to make that happen.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Damerla. And Mr. Tedjo, same question to you. Just a reminder, the question is, as mayor, how do you plan to meet Mississauga's housing target of 120,000 new homes by 2031?
We absolutely need to do everything that's on the table in terms of building more housing, and I believe I have the most comprehensive plan to do that. If you get a chance to get one of these, this is our plan. You can go find some. Erica's here in the front. She's got a bunch. You can also go online at alvintedjo.ca/housing. And we spent a lot of time working on this. We worked with developers, with builders, with unions, with residents, in terms of how we can unlock more land, in terms of how we can make more as-of-right housing available along our main streets and along our transit corridors. How do we have transit-oriented development? How do we speed up approvals and cut red tape at City Hall? How do we make as-of-right building easier in the city? How can we facilitate that building as a municipality and not just be a regulator? How can we be a partner in order to do that? And I'm so excited about what we're being able to do, because everyone we've talked to understands that we need a change in this city. We can't just keep doing the same thing over and over again. Councillor Damerla is right. We have 32 cranes up in the sky. Only a single one of them is a purpose-built rental. That means it's so much harder to build rental in the city than it is to build market housing. And our plan is going to change that.
Okay, Mr. Tedjo, thanks so much. We appreciate this. We are now going to move on to question 2. And this time, Mr. Tedjo gets to go first. The question is, do you feel more below market and affordable housing should be a priority in Mississauga? And if so, what is your plan?
Absolutely, we need to build more affordable. This is the number one thing that we need to do in terms of housing after we unlock more housing. We have surplus land. We have $8 billion worth of land in the city of Mississauga controlled by the city. There's even more controlled by the province and the federal government. We need to unlock those lands to build affordable housing and tie those developers who are going to build there to build affordable housing. We don't need to reinvent the wheel. We've already seen this in Toronto with Housing Now, where they're building a number of new units in and around their different GO stations and transit stations, and that's what we can do here. We have that opportunity to develop with affordable models, with developers who are willing to build. We also need to work on our inclusionary zoning so that we can have more density in the right places. We also need a dedicated team at the city in order to accelerate affordable housing projects, so that that one building isn't by itself as the only affordable or the only rental building that we're trying to build in the city of Mississauga.
Okay, Mr. Tedjo, thank you for that. Ms. Damerla, your 1 minute.
We need to reduce the cost of construction. That's absolutely essential, whether it's market rent buildings or whether it's subsidized by the government. So I have a plan for both. When it comes to the market, whether it's condos or rental buildings, I'm focused on rental buildings. And one of the things that I've learned talking to developers is up to 25 to 30% of the costs are government-related costs. And that's why my plan says I'm going to waive development charges completely for purpose-built rental. That's going to bring down the cost of construction, make the units more affordable. And here's the really nice part. It's a finite pool. I'm using the Housing Accelerator Fund, so it's not going to touch the property taxes. But because it's a finite pool, it's going to be first come, first served. So you have to have shovels in the ground to actually avail of it. So that means that I'm hoping that there's this rush to Mississauga of purpose-built, people who build purpose-built rentals to come here and really get shovels in the ground so they don't lose the opportunity of that DC waiver.
Thank you, Ms. Damerla. For question number 3, we will lead off with Mr. Tedjo, and the question is, by the fall of 2023, Mississauga had a rental vacancy rate of less than 2% and some of the highest rental costs in this province, with the average monthly rent of a 1-bedroom apartment reaching over $2,200 in March of 2023. So, given these factors, would you consider more affordable rental housing a priority? And how would you address that as mayor?
No, that's a great question, and that's what we're trying to talk about today is the how, right? How do we get builders who are focused on rental? So we need to help them with their application fees. We can help them with their development charges. We can lower their parking minimums. We can make it easier for them by giving them density bonuses. If we know they're going to build rental, then we can help them with that. We want to make the process easier for them specifically. And after talking with the various associations around rental, these are the solutions that they've come up with. But to your point, Lena, the average salary in the city of Mississauga is $54,000. If you think about rent at $2,200 a month, that leaves only $1,000 a month for them to pay for everything else. That's transportation, that's food, that's just being alive in the city of Mississauga, which is why so many people find it so hard to do that, and they just continue to leave our city. We haven't grown as a city in the last 10 years. So we're relying on the same tax base to continue paying for the additional growth that we've got coming in the city. And that's not fair to them. And it's not fair to the next generation who had this promise that they could continue to live in this city. It's completely unaffordable.
Okay, thank you for that. And Ms. Damerla, your take on affordable rental housing.
So I kind of touched on part of my plan for affordable rental, which was to waive the DCs. I've also led the charge on removing parking minimums, because I've said let the market decide, because by forcing developers to build like unbelievable 0.8 where we're having an LRT built along here in Ontario made no sense, because it increases the cost of construction, reduces the number of units you can build. So I think between reducing parking minimums, and I really welcome both the federal government and provincial government pushing for removing parking minimums completely. I would embrace that. If I thought I had the votes at council, I would have pushed for removing parking minimums completely, but we brought them down from 0.8 to 0.5, so that's a great start, and that's really going to save a lot of money. My DC plan is also going to save a lot of money by waiving the DCs for purpose-built rentals. So I really think I have a very robust plan. I want to say that we need a balance, and I'll tell you why. So a lot of people talk about IZ, right? Inclusionary zoning. But here's what happens. If you increase the inclusionary zoning extensively, the market shifts the cost of that inclusionary zoning onto the end buyer. So someone's paying more. So we need to make sure we are fair to everybody. There's a role for inclusionary zoning. I absolutely think it's a great idea, but we have
Just
to
to be
keep
fair,
in
Ms.
mind.
Damerla, I'm going
Thank
to give
you
you another 5 seconds, but you have run out of time.
I think they got the idea where I'm going. Thank you.
Okay, candidates, thank you so much for this. Now we will conclude our first round with a lightning round. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond to the following questions. Since Ms. Damerla started us off in this round, we will start with her again here. And the question is, do you have a list of asks from the provincial government regarding housing in Mississauga? And if so, what does that look like?
Yes, I do. I can think of at least 3 asks. The first one would be, please remove the requirement for minimum parking. The second would be, start funding us for the upfront costs, that is housing enabling infrastructure. That's your wastewater, your water treatment, your water, your sewer systems. We need the provincial government at the table. They made some changes that really shortchanged us on the DCs we can collect. They've made some changes that makes it a little bit better, but we need to work on that more. So I really need that. And the third thing that I would really like to sit down and talk to the provincial government is, how are you rewarding your municipalities? So they're trying to reward municipalities on the number of housing starts, but we don't control that. The market controls it. Right now, depending on how you calculate it, anywhere from 50,000 to 80,000 pre-approved, zoned. The builders have the ability, we've already pre-zoned between 50,000 to 80,000 units. No one's building them. We've already pre-zoned them. So to say that, oh, Mississauga, if only Mississauga, and I'm not saying we don't need to do it, but if you think that if only Mississauga upzoned more, if only Mississauga did these things faster, that somehow the builders will start building, that's not true. There's already 50,000 to 80,000 pre-zoned units. So we need the provincial government to be realistic in how they're rewarding municipalities. Shortchanging us on and trying to judge us on things we don't control isn't fair to the taxpayer.
Okay, Ms. Damerla, thank you so much. Mr. Tedjo, I gave Ms. Damerla a little bit of extra time, so I'll be fair and give that to you as well. The question once again is, do you have a list of asks from the provincial government regarding housing in this city? And if so, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, absolutely. And Councillor Damerla is right. We absolutely need more funding from the provincial government, especially for critical infrastructure. We need to expand that. It needs to include transit. And the transit line that they've recently funded in terms of a $6 billion project around the Milton GO line is an incredibly important one. But rules and regulations need to be loosened up around those as well, so that we have transit-oriented development along the entirety of the corridor. We also need, in addition to funding, rules that are loosened up for municipalities like Mississauga. We don't have the same rules as the City of Toronto does with the City of Toronto Act. The City of Mississauga is the 3rd largest city in Ontario. We're the 2nd largest economy. There's no reason that we can't have sort of the adult rules that the City of Toronto has in terms of how we're going to build. We also need to stop MZOs. The project that took over a decade and a half to get going in terms of Lakeview was immediately rammed over by the provincial government with their MZO. There is a process to this. We need to clean up the process, but that's not the right way to do it. And there's also the building code. They've taken some of these changes recently with, the 2 stairwell, 6-story buildings. That's great, being able to move that. Being able to build more with mass timber was also really interesting. There's a lot of great innovations that can be done in terms of how we build housing in this province, and that has to change at the province first.
Mr. Tedjo, thank you so much. And that concludes our first round. You may now applaud. Candidates, thank you for that. Thank you, candidates. We will now move on to our second round of questions tonight. And the theme for this round is reducing housing barriers. So the question is, your vision for housing in Mississauga may not align with that of every resident. How do you plan to engage the public in this process? Ms. Damerla, you get to answer first.
So for me, public engagement is absolutely the most important thing. Here's a story. When I was first elected to council in 2018, among the first, business that was brought up was some councillors raised the idea of moving the Planning and Development Committee meeting from the evening to the afternoon. Of course, it's more convenient for councillors to have it in the afternoon because typically the PDC starts at 6 p.m. and go till 10 p.m. And as a rookie councillor, I objected to it, and there were 2 of us who objected to it when we were able to prevail, saying, but regular people are not going to show up at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. So we have to keep it at 6 o'clock. And so that's always been my guiding stone, that I always like to do my homework. I always like to consult with every development that I have. I want to make sure that I have buy-in from the people. So that's really, really important. For me, I think there are things that the city needs to do differently. I'm going to, all right, I'm out of time, so maybe I'll answer it the next time.
That's okay. We'll give you.
Can you? Okay,
can
thank
finish
you.
Your thought.
Okay. Here's an example of what the city can do better. So a developer came to me and said that, when we first apply, the city expects us to give a wind study. But and I know that that first iteration or whatever that building is going to look like, the city is not going to accept it. We're going to say, turn it this way, turn it that way. So why are you asking for a wind study right off the top when we know that this application is going to change? Why not wait for the wind study until we have finalized what the building is going to look like? Made absolute 1,000% sense to me. So I went to the commissioner right away, and to his credit, he said, you know what, Dipika? I'm going to look into it. So I think there is so many things we can do to really start removing the barriers. So it's just one example I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Mr. Tedjo, your time begins now.
Thanks, Lena. We need to do engagement better. There's a lot of public meetings. I've hosted a lot of them. I've been to a lot of them. They're not quality meetings, right? It's usually residents coming in and really just talking about what they hate about everything. There's not a partnership that gets created there. There's not a relationship where we're working with the builder, we're working with the community to find how we can make this work moving forward. So first of all, we need to have better consultations where we're actually talking about how to benefit the community through this project. The second piece is we have to also not let the process be weaponized and used as a way to forever delay getting anything built. Because one of the easiest things to do is to defer a study or defer something else and sort of say it needs more study. And yes, absolutely, we should do our homework, but we can't weaponize that process and let buildings not get built indefinitely or projects built indefinitely. And third, I think we do need to bring people along still to talk about the importance of building in this community. And we need to find a way to tell that story with residents. You talk to people who live in my neighborhood who say, there's not enough, like, why is that school closing? That school's closing because there aren't enough kids in that school, because we haven't approved enough housing in this community. It's like, where do your kids live? Oh, they moved to Brantford. Why did they move to Brantford? That was the only place they could afford. So you have to drive an hour and a half to go see your grandkids. Well, we're trying to make it easier so that your family can stay together and that you can rely on them for support. We need to do better in terms of how we're engaging and what we're talking to people about.
Thank you both for that. We will now move on to question 2. And the question is, and Mr. Tedjo, you get to respond first. The City of Mississauga, like many municipalities across this country, is facing a housing crisis. We all know this. This is a challenge affecting many families and many voters. Voters will want to know what they can expect from their next mayor and council. What is your plan of action to work with council to execute your platform?
I mean, that's a lot to answer in a minute, but we can't get a lot done in the City of Mississauga without council support, and I plan on working with everybody in order to get that done. I was incredibly proud to put forward our fourplex motion working with council in order to get that passed here in the city. Now, we didn't pass it initially, but we did pass it eventually when Mayor Crombie came back. But we need to find ways to collaborate with everyone, and I was happy to collaborate with Councillor Damerla when we were talking about reducing parking minimums along the Huron-Ontario line. Unfortunately, we didn't get enough votes to do that. But we need to find these opportunities to get council to come together where people have their priorities so that we can continue advocating and pushing forward collectively as a team. And I think part of the challenge is that there are different scenarios in every part of the city, right? In certain areas, they're more open to housing, or in certain areas, they don't have enough opportunities, right? You got 40% of all the new developments happening in Ward 1. So they have a very different perspective in terms of housing there. But what we need is leadership. We need leadership. We need someone with a vision who's got a plan for the next 20, 30, 40, 50 years in terms of how we're going to build the city moving forward, how we're going to integrate transit. And that's what I want to bring to this.
Thank you, Mr. Tedjo. And Ms. Damerla.
So I have probably among the highest number of development applications in my ward. Right now, as we speak, I have over 7,000 units under different stages of consideration. More than half of them are under site plan review, which means that they have already passed through the upzoning. So I have a lot of experience in moving these files, and I've learned a lot, and it's an experience that I value and that I will bring to the role as mayor. Absolutely, I think our council is generally, we've been a fairly collegial council, and I look forward to continuing to work with council to make sure that we can hit our housing targets and do the best we can in balancing, managing growth. We need to build more homes. We all understand that we need to build more homes. We all understand that there are things that the City of Mississauga can do better. And so I believe that there is a general foundational understanding at council now that today's world is very different from even 2 years ago, very different from even 3 years ago. I do believe that the council is ready to embrace the challenge before Mississauga, and I look forward to working with everybody in a collaborative fashion to make sure, and to provide the moral leadership to make sure that Mississauga does its part in this housing crisis.
Candidates, thank you. Our next question is, from shadow studies to parking minimums, there are a number of requirements that the City of Mississauga requires developers to meet in order for a project application to be approved. Do you feel that the current requirements are restrictive to Mississauga's growth? If so, what would you work to change? Starting with you, Ms. Damerla.
Thank you for that question. Very recently I had a very interesting conversation with a developer. And we had this conversation where we said, this is what the Planning Act requires. It's fairly basic. And then here's what the City of Mississauga requires from an application. And so the question becomes, obviously many of the things that we are asking, there's a very good reason for asking. But are there things in the difference between what the Planning Act is asking for and what the City of Mississauga today is asking for? Are there things that can be addressed and removed if they're not adding value? Should we be doing this analysis? Absolutely, 100%. I shared the example of the wind study. I mean, it's a no-brainer. There's a few other examples that have been brought to my attention. They all make sense to me. So I think there's a real opportunity to look at how we do our application process. One of the things I really, really want to do is we get really great quality applications, and then we get applications that aren't so good. We charge the same application fee, whether it's a good quality one or not so good. Can we find a way of rewarding the good quality application? Because it's going to do two things. By the reward, it's going to increase the general quality of all applications. And the second thing it's going to do is obviously speed things up, right? And it creates a nice competition to get high quality applications. And so I use these examples just to say I'm very, very open to the idea that at the City of Mississauga we can do better and we need to do better.
Thank you for that, Ms. Damerla. Mr. Tedjo, your time begins now.
I'm so excited to talk about this. There are so many things that the city does that makes it harder for developers and builders to build, right? The provincial legislation talks about a box. Can you build in that box? We regulate everything else. We require the shadow studies. We require the wind studies. There was a wind study for a townhouse complex in my neighborhood. It's a townhouse, but we required it. We also require angular planes that cut off tops of buildings, right, which makes it more expensive, less affordable to build. We also have floor space maximums that define how much we can actually build in a particular area. We also have excessive stepbacks in so many different places around the city. I'm really excited. Take a look at the plan again. We're talking about a lot of these different pieces in terms of how can we remove them and remove these barriers to make it easier. Why are they there? They were there to intentionally depress the amount of building that gets built in a particular community. That was the intention when they put those rules into place. We need to remove them to make it easier for all these buildings to get built.
Mr. Tedjo, thanks so much for that. We are now on to our second lightning round question. We will start this time with Ms. Damerla, and the question is, what types of housing policy areas, if any, would you use strong mayor powers to advance?
The short answer is I don't expect to have to use them. I mean, I always think of Hazel McCallion. She was a very strong mayor, and she never used strong mayor powers because they didn't exist. So I do believe that the best way forward is not to use strong mayor powers, because once you start to use them, it creates a council dynamic that can be difficult when it comes to other areas. So I truly do believe that I'm not going to need to use them, and I will be able to forward the city's agenda of doing our part. I take great pride. Our entire nation is facing a housing challenge. I want Mississauga's legacy to be, during that housing challenge, Mississauga did its part and some. It's a wonderful challenge. It's nation building. We should all be pulling together. And I believe I can lead because I can, advocate as well as inspire council to make sure Mississauga is a leader. Thank you.
Ms. Damerla, I'll give you 20 seconds to respond to this. So are you committing to never using strong mayor powers at City Hall?
I think what I would like to say is I don't expect to have to use them.
Okay. Mr. Tedjo, same question to you. What types of housing policy areas, if any, would you use strong mayor powers to advance?
We're talking about a crisis. This is a real crisis. We need to use all the tools available to us to address the housing crisis. The one and only time that Mayor Crombie used strong mayor powers was to get fourplexes passed and build more housing. Unfortunately, Councillor Damerla, you didn't vote with us on fourplexes initially, and that's why the mayor had to come back and use her strong mayor powers in order for us to get the pass of the motion, and in order to get us to continue showing that we have leadership in this city, and I think that's incredibly important. We got $113 million from the federal government over the next 3 years to build housing because we passed this motion. We need to continue working with every level of government, and we need to use all the tools available to us in order to build the housing that we need to get done. So obviously, we always want to do things by consensus and work together when necessary. In order to build housing, I would use strong mayor powers.
Okay. Ms. Damerla, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I'd like to respond by saying that actually Mayor Crombie did not have to use strong mayor powers to get the fourplex passed because it actually passed with a majority. So it's factually incorrect to say she had to use strong mayor powers. And the only other thing I'd like to, and I know there's a question on this, so I'm going to wait for that question, but I don't want to clear the record right now while I have the opportunity. What I voted against was not fourplexes. What I voted against was not being given the opportunity to do my homework. And I want to say that if anyone thinks that the federal money wasn't going to come because we wanted to do our homework, they're wrong. Mississauga was the 13th or 14th city to get the federal funding. Since then, an additional 50 cities have gotten the federal funding. The last one was April 26th. So if anyone says that the only way we would have gotten that funding is if we had rushed through without doing our homework, they're wrong. That's inexperience.
Okay, Mr. Tedjo, Ms. Damerla says she did not vote against fourplexes and says the strong mayor powers were not necessary. I'll give you some time to respond to that.
So, I mean, it's very clear the vote failed. It was a 5-5 tie, right? The vote failed. No vote can come back to council within a year without the strong mayor bringing it back to council. She had to use her powers to get that. And because you switched your vote, we did get a majority in the end, so she didn't eventually need it if she was there in the first place. But absolutely, she needed strong mayor powers to bring that vote back, because it wouldn't have come back because the vote failed because you voted against it. But there was a $2 billion limit in terms of this fund that the federal government said, we want you to do this, and we are doing it in sequence. So as soon as the fund is done, that's it. That's the end of the pot of money. And we've seen Oakville and we've seen Windsor vote against it, and they did not get the funds. We were working directly, I was working directly with the minister's office, who tweeted at us as soon as we voted how disappointed that they were that we weren't willing to vote for fourplexes and housing along transit stations. So that's the position, that's what happened.
Ms. Damerla, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that as well, as this back and forth continues.
Actually, it's factually incorrect to say that because the vote was a tie that it couldn't come back, because I introduced a motion right after the vote failed on the tie to say I wanted staff to bring back a report telling us what is the best way forward, feasibility, what is the best way forward for Mississauga to proceed with the fourplexes. So I brought a motion because if I wanted it killed, if I didn't want fourplexes, what would I have done? You lost the vote, end of story. Instead, I introduced a motion that passed unanimously, asking staff to report back on what are the hows of how Mississauga could do a fourplex. Staff brought that back, and we voted on that report. End of story. And as for, I'll just say this again, we were the 13th or 14th municipality to get it. As recently as April 26th, a municipality got the funding from the federal government. We got it, I believe, in early January, I can't remember, or late December. 5 months later, municipalities are still getting the money. So I really reject the idea that somehow municipalities shouldn't do their homework just because a senior level of government is saying there's this pot of money and we have to rush. We should do our homework. I was very happy with where we landed with the fourplexes. I was very happy with staff's recommendation, but I was not prepared to be bullied and rushed into making a decision.
Okay, candidates, thank you for that. And that concludes our second round. You can clap for the candidates if you'd like to. Candidates, before starting our third round, we are going to break the format to hold a record round of questioning. Here's how this will go. In this round, we'll be asking each of you about your personal records on housing and how your stances may have evolved. Each candidate has had the opportunity, we want to be clear about this, to see their record question in advance, but they have not seen their opponent's questions. In this round, audience members are allowed to applaud after each candidate speaks. Our first question is for Ms. Damerla, and the question is, you were part of the group of councillors who voted against fourplexes. I know you were just talking about that, saying that you wanted a feasibility study to be conducted first. As a result, the federal government was prepared to withhold millions in funding for the City of Mississauga because of our lack of progress on housing. The question is, given the scale and urgency of the housing crisis in Mississauga and that a study on threeplexes was already completed, how do you decide what types of projects are worthy of fast-tracking or speeding up approvals and which warrant further exploration first?
Fast-tracking doesn't mean we don't do our homework. As simple as that. We must always, always do our homework. These are big changes. What it means is you do your homework a bit faster. You put more resources. We always want to make an informed decision. Just because someone says X or Y or it's the fad of the day, you must always do your homework, and I'm not going to apologize for doing the homework, and I want to reiterate that at no point was it that there was this deadline. And I can tell you that as a major municipality, it's leadership to say to the federal government, that's great, we want the time to do our homework, and after we've done our homework, if we still land in a different place and you don't want to reward us, that's fine. But I really wanted to understand, what does the fourplex look like? What's it going to mean? What's it going to mean for our city? And I wanted to make sure my residents had the time to socialize the idea. I did not just want to rush in and say, oh, the federal government's saying this, so we've now brought this forward, and you, the residents, have no say in this. We all have very different wards. There are certain wards where maybe the fourplex is not an issue. There are other wards where maybe it is an issue. Different councillors needed different ways to interact with their residents. I make no apologies. We landed in a great place, and as I keep saying, to suggest that somehow our money was at risk is really wrong. Of course, that's a great way to position it and politicize it.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Damerla. I'm going to keep things interesting here, Mr. Tedjo. I'm going to give you 30 seconds on the clock to respond to Ms. Damerla's answer.
I mean, we've seen fourplexes around the city for decades. We've seen them around North America for a long time. They've legalized these. We've seen studies. We know the easiest way to weaponize policy is to just delay and defer and study. We know we have a housing crisis. We need to take bold action. When the city of Victoria legalized fourplexes, they put so many restrictions around the box that they only built 3 of them in the first year. That's not how we get progress. Right? We need to be looking at decisive action and understanding where we have the ability to make concrete change. And frankly, I live in a fourplex. The house that I live in was built in 50, 60 years ago, but it's a semi-detached with 2 basement apartments. And so the fear around what we're trying to build here, what we're legalizing is, I think, unfounded, and I think there are ways that we can continue to talk to people and show leadership that we understand that this is a real crisis and we need to take action.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tedjo. This question is for you, and it is on your record. The question is, the Huron-Ontario corridor, where the new Hazel-McCallion LRT line will soon be running, has been identified as a major hub for development because it offers rapid transit along one of Mississauga's busiest roads. And yet, you voted to support your council colleague in Ward 1 when he brought a motion to retain parking minimums along Huron-Ontario south of the QEW. This will require new condo development to include significant car parking infrastructure, which adds to building timelines and costs, as well as ensuring that road traffic will remain high in that area with fewer car lanes to accommodate it. Conversely, you voted to support Ms. Damerla in her motion to eliminate minimum parking requirements altogether north of the QEW. Knowing the impact on housing costs and timelines, why did you make different decisions for 2 different sections of Huron-Ontario?
Yeah, Lena, that's a fair question. I mean, all of council supported, not all of council. All of council supported removing Councillor Dasco's ward from the study. And that was a tricky one because we wanted to study the entire corridor and Councillor Damerla and I wanted to remove parking in the entire corridor. In order to get things passed, sometimes we have to make difficult decisions. And in order for Councillor Dasco to support studying the rest of the line, we had to remove him from that study. And I didn't like having to do it, but we do need to bring councillors along, and that's what we had to do. I still believe that we shouldn't have parking minimums along the corridor or in any major transit station area, and we need leadership at the city that's going to say that for all of council, and that's what I would do.
Thank you, Mr. Tedjo. Ms. Damerla, would you like to respond to that?
No.
You don't have to. Okay. Now, the following question, easy enough. This was intended for Ms. Parrish, who is obviously not with us here tonight. We are going to ask the question as it would have been read to her, and we are going to invite both of our candidates to respond to it and share our thoughts. The question is, when the provincial government introduced Bill 23, which sought to get rid of developer charges, DCs, on affordable housing, discount DCs on rental housing, and PACE DC increases on for-purchase housing, you were quoted as saying, "This is the developers will rule the world bill." That is what it should be called. What is your stance on this today? And as mayor, would you scrap DCs on any housing development types? Ms. Damerla, you get to go first.
Can you actually repeat the
Yep,
question?
absolutely. When the provincial government introduced Bill 23, which sought to get rid of developer charges on affordable housing, discount DCs on rental housing, and PACE DC increases on for-purchase housing, Carolyn Parrish was quoted as saying, "This is the developers will rule the world bill." That is what it should be called. What is your stance on this today as a candidate? And as mayor, would you scrap DCs on any housing development types?
So here's the reality. Development charges, or the costs, the things that development charges pay for still have to be paid for. So that is, if you're building more, you need to build more stormwater capacity, water, wastewater treatment plants. And of course, with infill, it's a little bit less sometimes than with greenfield, but you still need to upgrade. So this needs to be paid for. The question that's really become is who pays for it? Historically, we've asked the developers to pay for it. And now, because the cost of construction is so high, frankly, this is what developers are telling me, that their cost of construction is high, people's ability to buy is here. So we need to find, as government, a way, at least for the short term, to reduce the costs of development to the developers. So the question then becomes, okay, so if the developer is not paying for it, so that we can incent them to start building now, how do we pay for it? We need to look for a new model. These costs still need to be paid for. I cannot put it on the property tax bill. And that's why one of the things that I have front and center in my platform is I want to fight for a new deal from the province. We're Ontario's third largest city, second largest economy. We just saw Toronto got the new deal for $1 billion. We saw Ottawa get a deal for about $500,000. Mississauga needs its own deal. But even more broadly, I think as a province, we really need to start talking about what is the best way to pay for the construction, the infrastructure, housing enabling infrastructure, and not get distracted into the provincial government's this bill or that. This is a real issue. It is adding to the cost of construction. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Tedjo, over to you.
I mean, Bill 23 brought in some problematic things, and the development charges were one of them for municipalities who obviously need the revenue in order to build the infrastructure. And I think they've seen the error of their ways. Bill 185 came in recently, just a couple of weeks ago, and reversed a number of the decisions that they had previously made. One of many decisions that this province has reversed over the last couple of months. But it's incredibly important in terms of what they were trying to do, which is understand that the cost model was not working and that we need to do different things in order to change that. So in our plan, we talk about how we can partner with builders. Builders aren't the enemy. The builders are going to help us get more building done. And so understanding their cost model, understanding their processes, understanding how much time it takes them to go through that, that's where we can focus our efforts in terms of how we can get the changes done. So you think about planning and how you go through a 9-month process to approve a project, and then you do it again at the region. Now we're getting that downloaded onto the municipalities, and that will help. But we need to fast track the right projects, especially around affordable housing.
Mr. Tedjo, thanks so much. And that concludes the third round. You may now applaud. Moving on to our final round tonight. This round's theme is building for the future. Starting with Mr. Tedjo to respond to the following question. Over 11,500 people are on the Peel housing waitlist for supportive housing, and as we said earlier, Mississauga has one of the highest rental costs in Ontario. So, would you prioritize certain housing types, and if so, which ones and why?
So we absolutely need every single kind of housing. We do need market housing. We do need purpose-built rental. We do need affordable. We do need supportive housing. We do need shelters. I put in a motion with Councillor Hornick last summer to help us build more shelters here in the city of Mississauga, and we've got one right on top of my campaign office now. We have a project for supportive housing in the city of Mississauga that I'm incredibly proud of called Indwell, which is being built in the Clarkson community. And it's part of a network of supportive housing that's being built in Port Credit and in Streetsville. We need to support supportive housing. And the wait list actually, I think, is 19,000. I know you wrote 11, but there is so much need. And everyone needs to understand the differences in these housing projects and how we can better support them. Some of it is going to be funding from the federal government, which we need. Some of it is going to be Peel region and the city of Mississauga stepping up and being part of projects like Toronto's Housing Now in order to get these projects built. Because without government support, without leadership from the city of Mississauga, this is not going to happen, and that needs to change.
Thank you, Mr. Tedjo. Ms. Damerla, I'm going to ask the question again. The question is, would you prioritize certain housing types, and if so, which ones and why?
This shortage is so astounding that frankly, I don't know that you can necessarily prioritize one over the other. We need to build all types as much as possible, more of them, faster, cheaper. But my plan does focus on purpose-built rentals, market-based purpose-built rentals, by trying to take a chunk of the cost off that by waiving the development charges and using the Housing Accelerator Fund from the federal government to finance that. But there's, so there's two parts. There's the market-based housing, and we have a role as government to try and reduce the government costs in that. But there's this other part, which is the deeply affordable housing. The developers are not going to build it. That's not going to be built by the market. Government has to build it, but the municipal government cannot build it. For every dollar of tax that you pay, municipalities collect only 9 cents. The rest of the 92 cents goes to the federal government and the provincial government. I cannot build deeply affordable housing on the 9 cents that I'm collecting for every dollar in taxes you pay. The federal government needs to be at the table. They need to be imagining more. They need to have an ambitious plan. We've done it before. After the war, we built, and the federal government built and built and built. And we need the federal government to do that again, to build and build and build deeply affordable housing. I look forward to partnering.
Thank you, Ms. Damerla. I'm going to start enforcing the time a little bit more just to keep things moving tonight. And for our next question, we'll start with Ms. Damerla. The question is, major transit station areas, or MTSAs, are lands within a 10-minute walk of a transit station or stop. In Mississauga, these areas are primarily 3 streets: Hurontario, Dundas, and Eastgate Parkway. Do you believe a focus needs to be placed in other areas in addition to MTSAs?
So land use planning cannot be divorced from transit if we are going to grow smart. If you don't want congestion, it's incredibly important that if you're going to intensify in some place, you have transit. Trying to intensify without transit is going to create an unlivable city. So you just cannot decouple that. So I think there is room in the city to upzone and pre-zone certain areas, but I will not do that without a credible transit plan. And I do have a bit, and I just want to take a few seconds to talk about my transit plan. What I would like to do is the Dundas BRT should not be a BRT. It should be an LRT east of Hurontario. I would love to see, and that's something that I would really, as mayor, want to push. And longer term, I'd like to see an LRT possibly either on Burnham Thorpe or Eglinton. And that really gives us the ability to start focusing more of that density in other parts.
Thank you, Ms. Damerla. Mr. Tedjo, on major transit station areas in Mississauga, your 1 minute begins now.
We absolutely need to build on every major transit station area in the city of Mississauga. The province understands that. They're removing a lot of the caps that prevent more building there. We need to build along the corridors as well, create new transit-oriented communities. I wanted to keep this positive, but I do have to talk about Councillor Damerla's record, because you voted against towns in your own community. You voted and are advocating against height or advocating for height limits around the Cooksville GO station, where we have 3 transit lines getting developed there, where you're trying to limit height and density on that project. And you voted against my transit station study in Clarkson when we had that moving forward along with Councillor Dasco. And so, yes, we absolutely need to do that. We have these studies done. We need to move forward with these. We can't keep looking at these projects and saying, okay, it's great that we have a GO station and a bus line and an LRT, but we still need to cap the height. We still need to cap the density. This is where we have the opportunity to be building a city and be building these communities that we always talk about that we want to build, yet our actions need to follow those words.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tedjo. Ms. Damerla, Mr. Tedjo took a shot at you, so I will give you 20 seconds to respond to this.
The rhetoric is great. I have a question for Councillor Tedjo. Why did you vote against a 38-story building at Park Street, steps from the Port Credit GO station, if you're such a champion of MTSAs?
Yeah, we all did, because we all know that we have to work with Councillor Dasco in order to move forward. But you voted against your own project in your own community.
And that's not the point. You've not answered. So if you're such a champion, I mean, it's very easy to say rhetoric. You have to work
It's a
with
voting
the
record, it's not rhetoric.
Well, you voted against something that wasn't even in your ward. You could have easily voted in favor of it. You didn't have to worry about residents like maybe some of the other councillors might have, but you chose not to. So it's very easy to talk and take shots at others, but look at your own record.
Mr. Tedjo, would you like to respond?
I'm good.
Okay. On that note, we are going to move on. For our final question, we will begin with Mr. Tedjo, and the question is, in 2023, Mississauga had an infrastructure gap of over $50 million. Housing requires critical infrastructure like sewage management, roads, walkways, and much more. What is your plan to support the infrastructure needed to handle more density?
We have a long-term infrastructure plan at the city and at the region, and water wastewater is incredibly important. I've got a plant of each for water and for wastewater in my community, and we need to upgrade them. And we are in the middle of a huge retrofit to all our water infrastructure along Lakeshore, which is really important. If we don't build it down here, no other developments through North Mississauga, through Brampton and Caledon can get done. So we need to be supportive of that. It is going to cost money. It is going to cost more investment. Some of that will come through DC, some of that will come through more building. But when we build, we help ourselves. When we build more and improve more housing, we expand the tax base. More housing equals, better taxes, lower taxes, because we have more resources. We hit our housing targets at the province, and we get another $32 million, which we lost this year because we didn't hit our housing targets, and we're not going to hit our housing targets this year. The federal government's money is also contingent on us hitting targets. We're going to lose another $28 million. So in order to pay for that infrastructure, we need to approve and get more housing built.
Thank you, Mr. Tedjo. Mr. Damerla.
Thank you. And I want to begin by saying that often housing enabling infrastructure is defined very narrowly. So it's like the water, the roads, and the wastewater. But to build neighborhoods, to build a livable Mississauga, we need more. We need the infrastructure that's the green space, the libraries, the community centers. I mean, these are the beating hearts of our neighborhoods, placemaking. So we really have to, and that's why I raised the issue earlier, we really need to look at the model that we use right now, which is the DC model to pay for some of this infrastructure. It's not working in a high-cost environment. So what is that new model? Do I have all of the answers? No. But do I think we need a new model? Absolutely. And do I think it's wrong, as the province has been doing so far, to so narrowly define housing enabling infrastructure? That's wrong. That's a recipe for disaster. So as mayor, one of the things, it's my commitment. If we are going to grow, we still have to be livable. It's not just roads, stormwater, and water. It's got to be the community centers. It's got to be the green space. It's got to be great public space. Thank you.
Candidates, thank you for that. Finally, we have one more lightning round, and we'll begin that with Alvin Tedjo. The question is, Mississauga was the only major city in the GTA to see its population decline in recent years. The primary population loss is from people in their late 20s and early 30s who are leaving to find housing elsewhere. What is your message to young people who are struggling to find housing in the city that they have grown up in?
So this is also deeply personal to me. I'm going to out my family who's right here. My sister is in the audience, so is my brother. They're in their early 30s. They still live with my parents. Sorry for saying that. But and my brother's going to be moving to Hamilton soon, and my sister and her fiance were in British Columbia. We don't have housing for the next generation. It is not possible. It is not affordable. It doesn't matter how much money you make. It is not possible. And housing prices have just gone up through the roof, and the affordability that we have in this city is a huge problem. We need to tackle this the same way that we tackle any major problem, all hands on deck. No stupid ideas, right? We need to move forward collectively and understand the challenge that we have. And I believe we have the most comprehensive plan in front of us that the city has ever seen to bring people together and get housing built, to give the next generation hope that they too can live in this city, that this city does welcome them, and that they do belong.
Thank you, Mr. Tedjo, and it's an important question, so I'm going to repeat it. Ms. Damerla, the question is, what is your message to young people who are struggling to find housing in the city that they have called home?
My message is that, a city without young people is not a city. We need people of all ages, young people, older people, everybody in between. And yes, housing's become unaffordable, and we need to fix that. But I also want to say one thing. Housing policy changes are required, but that alone isn't going to solve the housing crisis. There's two other problems: the market, the interest rates. Builders are not building because, as I said, the cost of building is here, people's ability to buy is here. We need to fix that. And there's a third problem. We have a huge labor shortage, folks, skilled labor. So to just focus narrowly on housing policy, as important as it is not going to be enough leadership. The leadership has to include, and as mayor, I will lead to work with the province, especially on the provincial nominee program and the federal government. We need to be importing skilled labor now to be able to build the homes that we need to, or training people here locally. We need to do both because there is a serious shortage of skilled labor, and unless we address that, we're not going to be able to solve the housing shortage just by changing policy, as important as it is. And we need to find ways to reduce that cost of construction. We need to embrace innovation. Modular building, I love it. I've been learning more about it. There's a real opportunity there to build faster and cheaper. There's a lot of things that we can do.
Okay.
So thank you.
Candidates, thank you so much. And that concludes our final round. You may now clap for the candidates. So this is where you, the audience, come in. Some of you submitted questions to More Homes Mississauga, and we want to try and get to some of those questions now if we can. The first question from Sam is, how do you plan on managing community groups that oppose all development? Mr. Tedjo, would you like to go first?
I mean, we touched on this a little bit when we talked about engagement. It's about quality engagement and getting people to understand, one, the challenge that's facing them, but two, what are they looking for, right? Because some people will just oppose everything, and that's difficult to work with. But I think most people are in the middle. Most people understand the quality of life that they have in their community because that's why they chose to live in the city. And they're worried that that's going to change. We need to tell them that that's going to be part of the process. We are going to build more transit so that your life can get better. We're going to give you options to downsize if you're a senior and you're looking to stay in your community. I have residents who live in Lorne Park who live on an acre of land and there's 2 people. They don't want to leave because there's nowhere else for them to go. They want to stay in the community that they have spent the entirety of their lives. Yet at the same time, they want to oppose some of the projects that are being developed. So we're trying to work with them and say, if you want to live here, there's an opportunity for you to stay here, right? If you talk about what you want to look for. And then engage them in a way that's productive, looking for more park space, looking for more transit, looking for more trails. This is the community that we're trying to build.
Thank you, Mr. Tedjo. Ms. Damerla, the question is, how do you plan on managing community groups that oppose all development in Mississauga?
You know, in my experience, what I find is people are not necessarily opposed to the development, although that's how it may come across. What they're really opposing is their fear of the unknown and the fear of what does this mean to my livability. So if you can address and you can reassure residents that we will manage the growth, that we will arrest congestion, that we will do our best to minimize this, I think that's how you start to get people on side. They're not really opposing the development. The fear is something else, and that is their fear in their head of unmanaged growth, right? So, and what I have found, having now 7,000 units in various stages of applications, and notwithstanding what Councillor Tedjo said, most of them have gone forward. I can tell you that for the most part, I've been able to bring the community alongside by reassuring them that and the one thing that you should never do is talk down to your residents or make them feel like what they're saying is not valid or it's wrong for them to express that, because you lose them right away. Listen to them with empathy, come back with solutions, show that you're willing to meet with them halfway, and you will find that you're able to shepherd developments as I've done so successfully. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Damerla. The next question comes to us from Lindsay, who is a student and resident in Ward 2, and the question is, how would you ensure you address transit poverty and affordability in future housing plans? Ms. Damerla, you get to go first.
You know, I said this before, I'll say this again. You cannot divorce land use planning from transit. You absolutely have to make sure that they go hand in hand. I do have a short-term plan, which is on Dundas, make the BRT into the LRT east of here, Ontario. I'd love to see another east-west LRT, either on Eglinton. I prefer Eglinton because then it connects directly to the Toronto West Eglinton LRT, and then you can go north to the airport, so I like that. I'm open to Burnhamthorpe. There's some talk about bringing the subway to Sherway Gardens. If that happens, it's a hop, skip, and jump to Mississauga. I would fight like hell as mayor to bring the subway to Mississauga. That would be a game changer. Transit is so important. We need to intensify. Intensification brings incredible benefits. You can build walkable neighborhoods. You can have vibrant neighborhoods, neighbors who know each other. The convenience, you know, if I run out of milk at 7, can I keep going? Can I share this story?
No, you cannot. I'm sorry.
Okay,
we have to move on.
All right.
It's my job to keep things moving tonight. So, Mr. Tedjo, the same question goes to you. How would you ensure you address transit poverty in future housing plans?
You know, I think one of the unfortunate things is that the poverty in Mississauga is generally hidden. People don't see the number of people in the encampments and our shelters. We're at 400% capacity of our shelters right now. We've never seen this challenge in the history of our city or our region. Everything needs to be connected, right? We need to be building connected communities. This means a minimum viable network of transit that's rapid, that's reliable, that has the bus drivers, has the buses available to get them, and not have all these closed door buses that are going through the city of Mississauga. We need drastic investment and planning to have a network across the city, not just along here in Ontario and Dundas, but we need to go north, south, and east, west around the entirety of a city in a grid that makes sense for people to be able to rely on. But that also means we need to be building other networks, walking networks, cycling networks, to give people the option. Poverty isn't just like people can't afford to go around the city unless you have a car. That's the only option most people have. And if we force them to only rely on the transit system and that's unreliable, that's unfair. So we need safe transit, and we need safe biking networks and pedestrian networks across the entire city, and we don't have that right now.
Thank you, Mr.
And we need to
Tedjo.
prioritize that moving forward.
Thank you very much. What I love is that we're getting a lot of questions from students. This next question comes from a student in the audience tonight, and the question is, what tools do you have to immediately alleviate the housing shortage other than approving new developments, like immediately levying a tax on empty residences, and what would that percentage look like? Mr. Tedjo.
So yes, my plan does include a vacant homes tax. We need to do this, and we're doing this with the region to get it implemented right away. It got delayed a little bit because of the dissolution and then the undissolution of the region appeal, but that is one step that we can use to gain more funding for the city, but also unlock a number of housing units in the city. We need to learn from the mistakes of, say, Toronto, who didn't do the vacant homes tax well, and learn from cities like Vancouver, who was able to implement it years ago and has increased it since, and cut in half the number of vacant units that were available because of their vacant homes tax. That's a great step forward, and that's something that we would implement right away.
Okay, Ms. Damerla, same question to you.
You know, the most successful vacant home tax is when you get a $0 revenue because no home is vacant. You know, just Councillor Tedjo did say that at the region we're looking at it. I'm happy to support that, and but you know, I'm really hoping that the revenue from that is really, really low, and. But yeah, we'll see how that goes.
Okay, candidates, thank you so much for that. And to close out tonight's event, each candidate will have an opportunity now to give their closing thoughts. You each get a minute and a half. Audience members are welcome to applaud after each speaker if you choose. We will begin with Ms. Damerla.
Thank you. I want to just begin again by thanking all of you for being here. I want to say I'm the most experienced candidate. I'm the only candidate who has served in cabinet. I have served as a member of provincial parliament. I've served on council now for almost 6 years. And I've run a small business. I've raised my daughter here, Mississauga's home. And all of this has prepared me for today. I'm ready to lead. And over time, I've developed a good reputation of delivering results and getting things done. And I want to say of all of the very many different accomplishments, the one I'm most proud of are not necessarily the splashiest ones or the biggest ones, but the ones where people said to me, Dipika, you cannot do it. And I got it done. And I'm going to share 3 examples. The first one is, you know, when I started to wanted to create a BIA in Cooksville, I was told that for 20 years, It had been tried, multiple efforts were made, and they were not able to create a BIA in Cooksville, and I was not going to be able to. I was able to create a BIA in Cooksville. It's thriving. In fact, I missed their board meeting today because I'm over here. They said to me, Dipika, you're never going to be able to shut down Dundas Street in Mississauga. We don't do that kind of thing to do a festival. We had the Taste of Cooksville, amazing festival, shut down Dundas. Then they said that there's this illegal weed store that people have been trying to shut down for 4 years, no luck. They said you're not going to be able to shut it down. We used an unorthodox method. We put up these big concrete blocks, but I was able to shut it down. And that's what I'm going to bring to you as mayor. People are going to say you can't do this and you can't do that. Yes, it can be done. That's what I'm going to bring to you. I have the experience to hit the ground running. And I always like to say I moved to Mississauga from Toronto because it was affordable. But I stayed because it made me feel like I belong. And that's priceless. And that's the kind of mayor I will be. Thank you.
Mr. Tedjo.
We have a real choice, I believe, to make in this election. This is one of the first times, we've only had 2 mayors in 46 years where we get to decide the direction of the city moving forward. So you have a question that you have to answer for yourself. Who do you trust? Who do you agree with? Whose vision and who do you believe has the energy to put forward a plan and deliver a better city for all of us? I think that over the last number of years, I've worked with all my colleagues, with the federal government on housing, with the provincial government on transit, to get the job done that we all want. We want these complete communities. We want a neighborhood that we can walk through and go to a corner shop and grab a donut and a coffee. We want these livable cities. We want a future for our city that we can imagine our kids growing up and using and living there. That's all we all want. People want shelter, they want safety, they want security, they want opportunity. They want their businesses to thrive. That's why my parents chose Mississauga. That's why my wife and I chose Mississauga. I see every day my 3 kids growing up and trying to find the opportunities for them in the schools that they go to and the activities that they do, and to see them not have that opportunity because we've failed over the last several years to build the appropriate housing, to keep this city affordable for people like them when they grow up, that disheartens me. But I believe there's hope, because I believe that we can build a better future together, because we have the people right now in this moment, in this city, in this province, in this country, who understand the challenges that are in front of us, who understand that in order to work together, in order to get this done, we need to work together to build the housing, to build the transit, to build an affordable city that we can all live in together. And I'm so incredibly proud of everyone in this room here today, of everyone who's going to be taking these issues to the ballot box, and that we have identified ourselves as a city that understands these challenges and are going to rise up to meet them. So I'm Alvin Tedjo. I hope I can count on your vote. Thank you so much for coming today.
Alvin Tedjo, Dipika Damerla, thank you for being here tonight, and thank you to the audience for being so great. It's been a pleasure to be your moderator tonight. Look, housing matters, affordability, housing matters, so we appreciate you being with us. And that concludes our discussion tonight. We do ask that members of the press who wish to join this evening's scrums, please stay seated while the audience exits. Please follow the guidance of the ushers who will help you exit safely. Good night, everybody, and thank you.